Hello, my name is Chris Gilbert. I'm a statistician with the State of Maine Department of Labor, Bureau of Labor Standards, and I'll be doing the Construction Wage Survey training today, where we will cover from start to finish how to complete this mandatory survey. So this is just a general outline for the class, which is split up into 5 categories. The first is why, that is, why do I have to complete the survey, and what is the data used for? The second is the scope, that's who has to complete the survey. Next is forms, that's what you'll receive in the mail related to the survey and when you will receive it. Next is completing the survey, that's how to complete the survey, what resources to use, and we'll also do a detailed step-by-step example of filling out the survey itself. And then finally is submitting, and that's how to submit the survey to us once complete. So first we'll discuss why you have to complete the survey. So the data you provide helps set the prevailing wage rates for Maine state-funded construction projects, which are estimated to cost $50,000 or more. These are the minimum hourly wages and benefits that construction workers are to receive while working. Note, you do not need to be involved in a state-funded construction project to complete the survey. We'll talk more about who must complete the survey in the next section, but just note that your involvement in the survey is not determined by your involvement in a state-funded construction project. Now, the example here on the right is the minimum rates for Androscoggin building projects. These can be viewed for each county and construction type at the link at the bottom of the slide. And we'll get into more information on what the construction types are and the county information means later on, but for now, this is what the survey data you submit is used to produce. Next, it also helps us maintain an accurate representation of wages for our solicited occupations, so the more data we have, the more representative the wage data will be. If some companies don't fill out the survey, it could cause volatility in the rates. So this is a real-life example of an occupation this past year where the rate increased to $74.20, up from $29.81 in 2024. So for example, if a company fills out the survey and pays their workers significantly over or significantly under what would be expected for that occupation, and other companies with the same type of worker do not fill out the survey, that one company's data may become the prevailing wage rate. So if contributing to the prevailing wages was not enough motivation to submit your survey, it is also a statutory requirement. So Section 1308 1-A states the director may require any person to provide information on the wages and benefits provided to that person's employees and such other information as needed to determine the prevailing wage and benefits. The director may assess a fine up to $250 for the first offense, $500 for the second offense, and $1,000 for any subsequent offense against any person who fails to provide the information as requested. So now we can move on to the scope of the survey, and this covers what companies must fill out the survey. So the company's classification in the North American Industry Classification System, or NAICS, determines your participation in the survey. So NAICS is a system which assigns 6-digit codes to industries in North America based on the type of work that industry predominantly does. If you're interested, the NAICS book can be found online at the Census Bureau website. For our purposes in construction, a company is selected to participate in the survey based on the NAICS codes provided here. So a NAICS code beginning with 23 or 23 indicates a construction classification. Next, we get a bit more specific by adding 236, which indicates building construction. One important note here is that we do exclude residential construction, which is classified by a NAICS code of 2361. All other groups of building construction, like commercial buildings or all other types of non-residential construction, are included in the survey. Next, we have 237, which indicates highway and earthwork, heavy, and civil engineering. Within that group, we have 2372, indicating land subdivision. An example here could be excavation work to prepare lots for an industrial building complex or campus. We also have 2373, which indicates highway, street, and bridge, which includes paving, rolling, and erecting bridges. So up until this point, we've discussed the industries which are understandably related to construction, like the construction of buildings, roads, etc. Now we have to discuss industries with a NAICS code of 238. These are specialty trade contractors. These industries perform work such as plumbing, painting, electrical, HVAC, and equipment installation. Since these trades and industries are still involved in construction, they are included on the survey. Just as a note, we do exclude residential specialty trade contractors, which start with 238 but end in a 1, as you can see as the bottom point there. So basically, to sum up this slide, if your company has a NAICS code that fits into any of these categories other than residential construction, you are included in the survey and must respond with at least some data for the survey. How much data you have to submit will be discussed later. So now, if your company falls into one of the NAICS categories on the previous slide, the amount of data you have to submit is based on how many hourly paid construction workers you have. So if you have less than 5 hourly paid construction workers during the survey period, you do not need to fill out the wage and benefit records for your workers. You are still responsible for filling out the employer details section of the survey, which will be discussed a little bit more later on. And if you had 5 or more hourly construction workers during the survey period, you must complete the entire survey. We'll get into what the survey looks like a bit later on in the presentation, but for now, it's important to note that everyone, regardless of employment, must fill out at least part of the survey. The employment decides how much you'll have to complete. So, to sum it all up, do you need to complete the survey? The answer is yes. If you receive the survey, a response is required by law. Again, how much data you need to submit is dependent on your employment during the survey period from the previous slide. And again, I just want to remind you that we do include those specialty trade contractors that are related to construction in the survey, such as plumbers, electricians, appliance installation, etc. For the purposes of this survey and setting the main prevailing wage rates, these trades are counted as construction. And one more important note here regarding your mailing address. If you receive the survey with the wrong address for your company, or you've recently moved, please reach out to our Unemployment Insurance or UI division to update your address. This is the database that we use to pull the company's information for the survey. And here is the UI contact information. The phone number is 207-621-5120, and they can also be reached via email at division.uctax@maine.gov. There's also additional information there located at the URL at the bottom of the slide. This is very important. Once the mail hits the post office, we assume it is reaching the company unless a PO return is received. If a PO return is received, we will have to get an updated address. This will delay the date you're notified of the survey, but importantly, it will not change the deadline to complete it, which does include the penalty that we had discussed earlier. This being the case, it is very important to have the most current address with UI Insurance. So please reach out to the UI division to update your address if you've recently moved or receive a survey with an old address. So now we'll move on to the forms that you will receive and when you will receive them. So this is the first form you will receive in late June, and we call this the pre-note. And just as a note here, all of the example forms that I'm showing on the right-hand side of the screen here are not exactly what you'll receive in the mail. There may be minor differences year to year, such as the dates, the URLs, and other information. The examples in this presentation, I've redacted the dates to avoid confusion, so please carefully review the survey forms once received at your business for the current calendar year, gather the current dates and other information. Overall, though, the forms you'll receive in the mail will be very similar to those presented here today. And again, the pre-note is basically a brief one-page overview of the survey, letting you know what to expect. And it's sent to notify companies of the upcoming survey. It also notably does allow companies to respond if they plan to have less than 5 hourly construction workers working during the survey period. And what allows you to do that is boxed off in red here, and it reads, "What if I won't have any employees in July?" So if you will have 4 or fewer employees working in Maine during the survey period, which is the second and third weeks of July, you can send us an email or give us a call. If you verify that your business will employ 4 or fewer workers during the survey period, you are not required to submit wage and benefit records for your workers. And this is basically a way for you to complete your survey early if you have 4 or less hourly construction workers. Again, if you will have less than 5 hourly construction workers, these instructions are included on how to exempt your business for the year. And if you have 5 or more hourly construction workers, nothing needs to be done at this point. I just want to go back to that term "for the year." Once you're in our list to receive the survey each year, you will remain on that list until your business either closes or you are no longer involved in construction. Some companies reach out to us year after year and say they will never have more than 4 employees, and they'll ask to be permanently removed from the survey mailing. This may be true that you'll never have more than 4 hourly construction workers, but we have had accounts of companies growing over the years when they didn't expect to. So even if you never expect to have more than 4, your company will remain on our list for this reason. Luckily though, if you have less than 5 hourly construction workers, you can simply send us an email after the pre-note is received, and we'll verify that in a separate database. If everything looks good, you are all set again for that year. So a month later in July, the full survey materials will be sent to your company address. So all the companies that did not respond to the pre-note letter in June on the previous slide will receive the full survey materials, which includes a cover letter, the occupations list, the survey form itself, the survey instructions, and a prepaid return envelope, which I'll be covering more in the submitting section at the end of the training. These will all be sent via physical mail, but can also be downloaded electronically via the Maine Prevailing Wage Rates in Construction website, and that URL is provided at the bottom of the slide there. If you don't want to type out the URL in the search browser, you can also just search Maine Construction Wage Survey in Google, and it should be the first result that comes up. Just as a note, if you do decide to fill out the survey using the electronic form, please make sure it's for the current calendar year, which I've highlighted here in yellow. These would be the forms for calendar year 2024. So first in the list of documents you'll receive is the cover letter, and this is a brief explanation on why you're receiving the survey. It also includes those links that we discussed on how to download the forms electronically and how to submit. And again, the submitting instructions will be covered later at the last part of the class. You'll also receive the occupations we solicit wage and benefit for on the survey. This is a 2-sided sheet with the following columns that are found up at the top. On the top left is the code column. This is the occupational code tied to that worker. So for example, 472061 will be the occupational code for the title construction laborer. The next column over on the right is the title column, and that's the occupational title of the worker. So for example, construction laborer would be an occupational title. The middle column is a description, and that's information on what that worker does in the field. And then finally, the column all the way over on the right is the includes column, and that's other working titles that fit within that occupation. We'll discuss more details on exactly how to use this sheet in the next section, completing the survey. Now for the actual survey and what you will fill out. We'll cover details about how to fill out this form in the next section, again completing the survey, but for now this is what the 2-sided survey form looks like that you will receive in the mailing. Next are the survey instructions. This is very important to review for completing the survey. I'll be discussing more on these instructions when I go through examples of completing the survey later in the training, but I do want to stress that these instructions do have the answers to many of the questions we receive on the survey each year, so please review these instructions closely. And it is 2 pages. On the first page up at the top, it is the instructions for completing the wage reporting section, which is section D. That is the second page of the survey form, which we'll be showing more later. The middle section is the benefit definitions. That's what type of benefit data is required and how to submit that information. And then at the bottom is the formulas for calculating hourly benefit values if your pay schedule is not reported as hourly. And then the second page is the construction classifications. So this explains the types of work that fall within the 3 construction classifications we're looking for information on the survey. So wage data on the survey is split between 3 groups. There's B2, which is building classification. That includes commercial other than residential 1 or 2 family homes. Then is HI, which is highway and earth. And then finally HV, which is heavy and bridge. If you're not sure what construction classification to designate to your workers, this sheet will help. Also, as a note, you'll see at the top of the page on the right-hand side, it says lists are not all inclusive. I've highlighted that here in red. This means if you have any hourly paid construction workers doing building, highway and earth, or heavy bridge projects, and their construction classification is not listed on this sheet, we do still want them included on the survey based on what type of work they're doing. Again, be it B2, highway, or heavy bridge. We've listed the most prominent project types here, but we cannot list every single project that falls under the 3 classifications. So the next form you may receive is the 30-day notice, and this would be sent in August. So about a month after the survey, if the company did not respond or there are errors on the survey, this notice will be received by the company. By errors on the survey, we mean that the data was received, but there are potential issues with the data that cannot be entered unless they are either corrected or verified, and we will reach out to you if we believe there is an error. This notice includes the links to fill out the survey, but please note that the survey forms themselves will not be included in this mailing. They are only included in the July mailing itself. Also on this letter is information about the deadline for the survey and the fine associated with non-response. Just as a note, if you did respond to the survey via physical mail and you still received this 30-day notice, there is a good chance that your survey and this notice may have crossed in the mail. So if you do receive this notice and you want to be sure everything is all set for your company, you can give us a call and we'll be happy to verify that with you and let you know you are all set over the phone. And again, we'll talk more about how to submit the survey in the last section of the presentation. So next is the 60-day notice, which will be received in September. So about 2 months after the survey, if the company did not respond or there are errors on the survey, this notice will be received. Again, this notice includes links to fill out the survey, but the survey forms will not be included in this mailing. And this notice does have a more personalized penalty information, such as how much you'll be fined for non-response. And as a note here, this is the final late notice you'll receive before your business is assessed a penalty based on the amount presented on this form. If you receive this and you have not filled out your survey, it is important to do that ASAP. Then finally, if a company still does not report usable data to us by the deadline in October, this penalty notice will be received. This is the notice of violation, and it is sent in October. The only way to remove a penalty at this point is through a formal appeal process. And please note, a company will receive this penalty if they either 1, did not send us data, or 2, the data they did send us is unusable and has errors. So basic point here is please get us your data before the October deadline as noted in statute. Otherwise, you will have a penalty assessed at this time. So now on to the meat and bones of the class, and that's how to complete the survey using the forms we discussed earlier. So as I mentioned, the survey form is the only form you actually need to fill out for the survey. All the other materials like the occupations list, the instructions, and the construction categories are all used to help you fill out this section of the survey. So let's talk about the first page of the survey and what it entails. First, you'll see the top boxed off section in red. This is where your business identifiers are located. This part will be pre-filled by us, but if you notice anything is incorrect here with the business name or address, please let us know via phone or email, and we'd be happy to get that updated for you. Next, you'll see Section A, Business Type, and it asks, are you still in the construction industry? This is the first section you'll need to complete, and it involves the following three options. The first is yes. This means you are still involved in the construction industry and will need to fill out the next sections, which I'll discuss on the next few slides. Next is no. So if your business is not involved in construction or construction support activities, answer with a no and describe your business activities that your business does. We will verify this in our system via the NAICS code, and we'll reach out to you if there's a discrepancy between what we have in our system and what you say your business activities entail. And again, just as a note, we do ask for the data for those construction support or related activities like plumbers, electricians, HVAC, appliance installation, etc. If your company does this type of work, you would be in the construction industry for the purposes of this survey. Last is closed. So if your business is closed, please provide the date of closure and any other information, and we will verify this in our system. So next is Section B1, which is construction employment. Here we are looking for the hourly paid workers only, and this does include hourly paid working supervisors and or foremen. And we only want the workers that are actively working for the 2-week survey period, which will be provided here, but again, it is the 2nd and 3rd weeks of July. And if you have 5 or more to report in this section, Section D on the back page of the survey must be filled out. For hourly paid supervisors and or foremen, they would only be included on the survey if they are actively doing hands-on construction work in the field. If they are only supervising workers, we do not want them included on the survey. Now on to the second aspect of Section B, which is boxed off here in red. So it reads, if you had explosive workers / blasters working for your company anytime between July 28th, 2024 to July 26th, 2025, you must indicate here and include their most recent wage and benefit information in Section D on the back of this form. So this is a request for special occupations within construction. If this is available on your survey, we will specify the specific type of worker we want included, and we will also specify the more expansive date ranges this request covers. This request does not follow the 5 or more requirement for wage data to be included as in Section B1. So in previous years, if you've had to fill out the survey before, this was a request for commercial divers and or flaggers in construction. For 2025, we are now asking for explosive workers and blasters. I've removed the black bars here to show that the dates in this case to show that we are looking for these workers between July 28th, 2024 through July 26th of 2025. Note this is covering just about a full year. Just about a full year. So for these requests, we're looking at a larger time frame past the 2nd and 3rd weeks of July, and we are also looking for any number of these workers to be included on the survey. So for example, if your company had 3 explosive workers in May of 2025, we would want them included on the survey, including their wage and benefit information. Also, these requests do not again follow that 5 or more rule as we discussed in Section B1. This being the case, if you had any number of these workers during the specified time frame, they must be included on the survey. So for a quick example, say a company had less than 5 hourly construction workers between the 2nd and 3rd weeks of July. In this case, I've added 0. But they had any number of explosive workers, in this case say they had 3, working between July 28, 2024 and July 26, 2025. We would expect to see the wage details for those 3 workers reported on the survey. We'll discuss the details on filling out the wage information soon, but I just wanted to show this as an example of clarity for this section. So next is section C. This is found at the bottom, and this is the company representative section. So please enter the point of contact information for who is filling out the survey, and this is who you will contact if we have questions on any of the data that is submitted. Please make sure this contact information is complete and legible. If we receive a survey that is either incorrect or has errors, we need to know who is responsible and reach out to them in order to get those questions answered. As I'd mentioned earlier, if we receive a survey with errors and we're not able to get them resolved before the October deadline, your business will still be assessed a penalty. So please make sure this section is filled out by the person who completed the survey and is familiar with the data, just in case we need to reach out for questions. Finally, at the bottom, you'll see please send me a free SafetyWorks calendar. If this option is not on your survey form, it's likely because we had a limited supply of calendars for that year. If it is on your form and you would like a free SafetyWorks calendar, you can put a check mark there and we will send one to your company address. Also, as a final note, if you had 4 or less hourly construction workers in B1 and you had no special occupation workers in B2, this front page of the survey is all you would need to fill out for the survey and submit to us. So now we can go over an example of the first page of the survey. So section A asks if you are still involved in the construction industry. If yes, say yes, as I've checked off here. Next is section B, where we'll be asked for your hourly construction industry workers that you had working. So here you would enter the amount of hourly construction industry workers you had during the 2-week survey period in section B1. In this case, it would be 11. Then if we had any special occupation requests for that year, please enter the number of hourly paid workers fitting into that occupation during the requested time period. In this case, we have 1 explosives worker. Next comes section C, which is your contact information. So here you would put your name and title down. For this example, I put Warren DeMartini. I don't know if anybody knows who that is, but he is one of my favorite guitarists for the band Rat from the 80s. Next, you would also enter your email, phone, and fax if you had one. Finally, if you want a free SafetyWorks calendar, you can put a check mark at the bottom there where it asks for the free SafetyWorks calendar. And again, if you had less than 5 hourly construction workers, this is all you would need to fill out and submit to us for the survey, assuming you had no special request occupations in section B2. Next, we'll discuss the back side of the survey form. So you use this page to enter individual wage and benefit data for each hourly paid construction worker you had in section B. Again, you need to fill this out if you either 1, had 5 or more hourly construction workers in section B1, and or had any number of hourly paid special occupations in section B2. If it may be useful to you, I've also created a 2-sided document which can be found in the same location as this training on the website. It's a 2-sided form with tips and tricks and useful links. So the first page is tips and tricks. It's a supplemental document to the survey instructions that you received in July, and it references each section on the back page of the survey form and provides some helpful notes and resources to use. The other tips and tricks section, which is down at the bottom of the first page, highlights common errors we receive each year and how to correct them. I've also color-coded each description to match the respective columns on the second page of the survey. So you can see the code column here is highlighted in blue with a little blue caret. The working title is orange, number of employees is green, and so on. Next is the useful links. And this is a list of all of the links I've mentioned throughout the training so far and all of the links that I'll be mentioning later on in the training in a clickable document. This not only has all of the links in one place, but also makes it so you don't need to manually type in the URL into your browser if it may be useful. So now we can start our example based on the first page of the survey form. And remember, we're expecting to see 12 hourly construction workers taken from section B of the first page. So if we go back to the first page in section B1, we have 11 construction industry workers total. And then in section B2, which are those special occupations, we have 1 explosive worker and blaster, which we also want to see included. So in total, we have 12 workers to add to the second page of the survey. So again, this is the second page of the survey where the individual wage and benefit information is added. It's called section D. And before we start adding our workers, I do want to point out this boxed off section in red, which gives a little bit more specification on some of the occupations. And it reads, occupations are classified based on the work performed, and in some cases on the skills, education, and or training needed to perform the work. So apprentices and trainees are classified alongside the journeymen and masters of the trades for which they are being trained. Helpers and aides are classified as 47-20-61 construction laborer because they are not in a formal training for the occupation which they are assisting. Welders should be listed under the trade to which welding is incidental. We'll discuss more about this point later on in our example, but for now, I just want to point this out so you know where it's located if you need to reference back to it at a later time. So first, before we start adding our workers, we can go over the one painter example that's provided already. So we have a working title of a painter, and the associated code for that worker is 472141. And the number of employees in this case is 1, and they were making an hourly rate of $18, health and welfare benefit of $2.47 per hour, annuity pension or retirement of $3.24 per hour, the hourly vacation, holiday, and sick days of 83 cents per hour, hourly per diem in lieu of wages of 78 cents per hour, and the hourly other of 12 cents an hour. And we also see that they were working in Androscoggin County as designated by AND for short, and they were working on a construction type of B2, so building construction. And as a note, we will be discussing how to calculate the hourly benefits section of this page later on with some additional examples. So now that we've covered the first example that's provided, we can start adding our workers. And again, we are expecting to see 12 workers added total. So here's our first worker to add to the survey. Say we have a construction laborer, male, who worked in Kennebec during the second week of July on a commercial building project. He made $32 an hour as an hourly rate, $2.14 an hour as a health benefit, $1.20 per hour for pension, and 64 cents an hour for PTO, and they had no other benefits. So first we see here that the worker is a construction laborer, which we can add to the working title column for the survey. And as we go through these examples, current details of the worker's information is boxed off at the top as we add them to the survey form. As you can see here, I boxed off construction labor at the top of the narrative section, since that's the working title we're adding to the survey. So next, we're going to need to add the code for the construction laborer. For this, we need the occupation sheet. So on the occupation sheet, which is included in your survey mailing in July, we see a construction labor is sectioned off here in red. And now we've found the title, we can see the code for this worker is 472061. We can then go back to the survey form and add the code to the code column. See here we've added 472061 for the construction laborer here. Next we see the worker is male, and in this situation we are only talking about one worker, so the number of employees and the gender fields can be filled out accordingly. We'll skip over the county and construction type for now, and we'll get to that a little bit later on, but we now see that they made $32 an hour as an hourly rate, which we can add to the hourly rate column. Same goes for the health and welfare benefit. We see this worker was earning $2.14 an hour as a health benefit, so we can add that to the hourly health and welfare column on the survey form. Next, we see they were making $1.20 an hour for pension, so we can add that to the hourly annuity, pension, or retirement section. And then for paid time off, or PTO, we see the worker was making 64 cents an hour. We can add this to the hourly vacation, holidays, and sick days column. We now see that the worker had no other benefits. With this information, we can enter $0.00 per hour for the remaining benefit fields, which are the hourly per diem in lieu of wages and the hourly other in this case. Now we can go back to the county, and we see here that the worker was in Kennebec County during the second week of July, so we can add Kennebec, or KEN, to the county column. And now we see the worker was working on a commercial building project. This would make the construction type B2 for this worker since it is building work. With this, we now have a complete first worker added to the survey. And now we can get on to a few situations which are not quite as straightforward. So now we can add our next worker. So say we have a backhoe loader operator, female, who worked in Penobscot during the third week of July on an alley construction project. She made $48.25 an hour for wages, $4.58 an hour as a health benefit, $708.33 that month for pension, 97 cents an hour for PTO, and an additional $1.45 an hour for an apprenticeship program, and she had no other benefits. So as with our construction labor we added first, we now need to look at this employee's working title and see it's a backhoe loader operator, which we now can go to the occupation sheet and find this occupation. So here we see the backhoe loader operator is listed under the includes column for a loading machine operator. If you classify your workers based on an occupation listed in the includes column, you can use that as your working title on the survey form. So just as a note here, if you have a worker that you know fits into the greater title column on the left-hand side, but their specific occupation that you categorize them as is not listed in the includes column, please feel free to use the worker's occupation on the survey form that you use at your company with the associated code, and we can use that information to update the includes column in future years on the occupation sheet. So in this situation, we see a backhoe loader operator is tied to the code 475022, which we can then add that to the survey form. Here we see the backhoe loader operator and the code 475022 added to the survey. Similar to the construction laborer, we only have one worker here who is female in this case. We add those details to the number of employees and gender sections respectively. So now we see that this worker received $48.25 an hour as their hourly rate. For the health and benefits section, we see she was earning $4.58 an hour, so we can add that to the hourly health and welfare section. Now we see that they made $708.33 for that month as a pension and retirement benefit. Since this survey requires all rates and benefits to be reported as hourly, we need to convert this monthly value to an hourly value. So at the bottom of the instruction sheet, you'll see the formulas for calculating hourly benefit values that I've included here. This provides the hourly conversion calculations for different pay schedules, which are yearly, quarterly, monthly, bi-weekly, and weekly. So for our employee here, we see they were paid $708.33 that month for pension. So we'll be using the monthly pay schedule calculation that I boxed off in red here. Next, we need to do the calculation itself. We know the monthly wage was $708.33, which we divide by the yearly hours for that employee. In this example, we use 2,000 hours. So just as a note, a typical full-time employee puts in about 2,000 hours per year. That's 40 hours per week times 50 weeks, taking into account 2 weeks for vacation, holidays, and sick time. So we will use that here. If you know how many hours your employees put in per year, use that number instead. So we can then take that value and multiply it by 12 months per year, and then we get the final hourly value of $4.25 per hour as the pension rate. So then we can add that $4.25 an hour for the hourly annuity, pension, and retirement section. Now we see she was making 97 cents an hour for PTO, which we can add to the hourly vacation, holidays, and sick days section. And now we see they were making an additional $1.45 an hour for an apprenticeship program. For this benefit, we need to go back to the instructions document to see how it's classified. So on the instruction sheet, we look for the benefit definition section, which describes how benefits should be reported on the survey for each category. And again, those categories are health and welfare, annuity, pension, and or retirement funds, vacation, EPL, and PTO, per diem in lieu of wages, and other. For any questions on what benefits should be included on the survey, this is your best reference on the instruction sheet. For our example here, we're looking for an apprenticeship program, which we see in the Other Benefits section here highlighted in red. And the Other Benefits section reads, this should include any other benefit that is accrued by an individual, such as employer-paid apprenticeship costs, the personal use of a company vehicle, or holiday time that has not been included with vacation time, etc. So since we saw employer-paid apprenticeship costs are covered into the Other Benefits section, we add that $1.45 an hour to the hourly other column. Now we see that she had no other benefits, so we can add $0.00 to the hourly per diem column. Now, as with the last case, we need to populate the county section, and we see here she was working in Penobscot County, so we add PEN for Penobscot to the county column. For the construction type, we see she was involved with an alley construction project. This description unfortunately isn't as straightforward as the commercial building project from our construction laborer worker that we added first, so we can reference the second page of the instructions document to see a list of work that falls under each of the three construction types. So looking at the construction classifications page, we see the three categories. Again, those are B2 for building, HI for highway and earthwork, and HV for heavy and bridge. We now need to look for an alley construction to classify our worker. So we can find alley construction here listed under highway and earthwork. So we know that this worker was involved in an HI or highway related work, which can now be added to the survey form. With HI added as the construction type, we now have a complete second worker added to our survey form. So now we can add our next worker to the survey. So say we have a communication equipment installer, male, who worked in both Lincoln and Saginaw counties on a telephone line construction project for both the second and third weeks of July. They worked the most in Lincoln County. He made $58.75 an hour as an hourly rate, $7.22 an hour as a health benefit, $5.55 an hour for pension, and they received 2 weeks of vacation plus an additional 7 paid holidays for the year as PTO, and he had no other benefits. So as with the other workers, our first step is to locate the communication equipment installer in the occupation sheet. So here we see the communication equipment installer is under the includes for a telecommunication equipment installer and repair. And we also see the code for this occupation is 492022. And we can now add that information to the survey form with the code 492022 and the working title of communication equipment installer. Next, we see the worker is male, so we can populate the number of employees and the gender fields accordingly. For the hourly wage, we see he was making $58.75 an hour. He was making $7.22 an hour as an hourly health and welfare benefit, $5.55 an hour for pension, and here we see for PTO that he receives 2 weeks vacation and 7 additional paid holidays for the year. We often see PTO reported this way since many employers provide their employees with a certain amount of PTO hours at the start of each year. So let's look at the instructions document and see how to calculate this as a benefit for the survey. So here's our instruction sheet again for the benefit definitions. For PTO, we want to look at the vacation, EPL, and PTO section that's boxed off here in red. And it reads, this is the time accrued by the employee during this 2-week period that would allow them to receive pay without working. This includes vacation, paid time off, PTO, and or earned paid leave, or EPL. Notably, leave time does not have to be taken during the 2-week survey period for it to be included as a benefit. I'd also like to point out this section on PTO benefits I wrote up in the tips and tricks handout, specifically about the Maine Earned Paid Leave Law. So that's sectioned off here in red, and it reads, if you have more than 10 employees in Maine for more than 120 days in any calendar year, employees generally must accrue 1 hour of earned paid leave for every 40 hours worked, up to 40 hours in a year. And then if we follow that link to the earned paid leave law itself, I've provided that here with a few of the main points highlighted here in red. It became effective on January 1st of 2021. It applies to employers with more than 10 employees in Maine for more than 120 days in any calendar year. And employees accrue 1 hour of earned paid leave for every 40 hours worked, up to 40 hours in a defined year. And it includes all employees. It includes full-time, part-time, temporary, per diem, etc. So next, going back to the tips and tricks document, I provided a formula for calculating hourly rates for PTO in the boxed off section here. So it reads, if you give your employees a base number of PTO hours per year, so for example 40, 80, etc., you can calculate the hourly rate by multiplying the PTO hours per year by their base wage, then dividing that result by their yearly hours. So for example, you may have 40 PTO hours per year, which is the definition for the Maine Earned Paid Leave Law, and say a worker had a $25 per hour base wage. You multiply that 40 by 25 and you get $1,000 in total benefits for that year. And then the 1,000 total benefits you divide by their hours worked for that year, which in this case we'll use 2,000 again, and that comes out to 50 cents an hour of PTO benefits for that example worker provided there. So now for our worker, our communication equipment installer, we see they received 2 weeks vacation plus an additional 7 paid holidays that year. So now we need to calculate how many hours that would be. So here we have 2 weeks, which would be 80 hours, and then 7 days, which equals 56 hours. And that comes out to a total of 136 total PTO hours for that year. Now we can apply that to our formula. So for our worker here, we see the calculation on the right, and it is 136 hours times their base wage of $58.75 an hour, and then again divided by that 2,000 hours per year. And we can see for PTO that this worker was receiving $4 per hour. So now we can add the converted hourly PTO value of $4 an hour to the survey. And just as a note, this EPL benefit is our biggest reason for calling back companies over errors on the survey. So based on the Maine Earned Paid Leave Law we discussed and referenced earlier, we expect to see EPL or PTO benefits for any employer who reports 10 or more workers on the survey. If we receive a survey with 10 or more workers and EPL is not provided, we will be calling the respondent back to gather that benefit information or figure out why it was not included. So please include this benefit for your workers if your business is subject to the Maine EPL law. Now we see he had no other benefits, so we can add $0.00 to the per diem and the other benefits column. Next, to fill out the county information, we see he worked in both Lincoln and Saginaw counties during the 2nd and 3rd weeks of July. So if we go back to our instruction sheet at the top, you'll see instructions for completing Section D. For this worker, since they worked in more than one county, we can see here in this boxed off red section, it reads, employees who work in more than one county should be reported only once in the county where they worked the most during the survey period. So also here on a similar note is the same instructions if an employee works in more than one trade. So reading this, it reads, employees who work in more than one trade should be counted only once in the occupation they work the most during the survey period. So now going back to our survey form, we know they did work in both Lincoln and Saginaw counties, but we also see that they worked the most in Lincoln County. This being the case, we would add LIN, or Lincoln, as the county for this worker. Here we see Lincoln has been added to the county column. Now we see they were working on a telephone line construction project. We can go into our construction classification sheet again and see what construction type covers this type of work. So under heavy bridge, we see telephone line construction here at the bottom, highlighted in red. So now we can add HV as a construction type for this worker. With that added, we now have a complete third worker added to the survey. So now we can add our next worker. So say we have a blaster/explosives worker, male, who worked in Androscoggin County during the second week of May on a multi-story office building project. They were paid $57.20 an hour as an hourly rate, $5.88 an hour as a health benefit, $4.57 an hour for pension, and $2.29 an hour for PTO, and they had no other benefits. We see here that they were working during the second week of May. This is outside of the survey scope, which again is the second and third weeks of July. However, because of our special occupations request, which we see here that explosive workers specifically are included if they worked between July 28th, 2024 through July 26th of 2025. Since May is included here, we would need to report this worker on the survey. This worker was an explosives worker, so we can now go back to the occupation sheet and find the associated code for this worker. Here we see the code for an explosive worker is 475032. We can now add the code and the working title to the columns and we are ready to continue. Again, we see there was only one worker who is male, so we can populate the number of employees section and the gender fields accordingly. At an hourly rate of $57.20 an hour, a health benefit of $5.88 an hour, a pension of $4.57 an hour, PTO for $2.29 an hour, and we see they had no other benefits, so we can enter $0.00 in the per diem and the hourly other column. They were working in Androscoggin County, which we can add to the county column for AND for Androscoggin. And finally, we see that they were working on a multi-story office building, so we can add B2 building construction to the construction type column. So now we can add our next worker. So say we have a working carpenter foreman, female, who is actively working in Somerset County on a building construction project for the third week in July. She was paid $58.24 an hour as an hourly rate, $4.28 an hour as a health benefit, $3.27 an hour for pension, and $2.45 an hour for PTO. They also received a base $120 that week for a per diem travel benefit, and they had no other benefits. So now we see they're a working carpenter foreman. We can go back to section B on the first page of the survey and see about including this worker. Since this is a working foreman, so they're basically actively performing construction work and not just supervising employees, we do want to include them since section B states including hourly paid working supervisors, which does include foremen. Now that we know they should be included, we need to add them as a carpenter by checking the occupation sheet. So we see here a carpenter uses the code 472031. Now we can add that information to the survey accordingly. The carpenter is female and there's only one worker, so we can add that information as well to the survey. They're making $58.24 an hour for a wage, $4.28 an hour as her health benefit, $3.27 an hour for pension, and $2.45 an hour for PTO. Now we see that they did receive $120 as a per diem benefit for work travel costs that week. So let's go to the instructions document again and see about calculating the per diem benefits. So in the benefits definition section, we see per diem benefits sectioned off in red here. And it reads per diem in lieu of wages. This benefit is usually project specific and is only to be reported if it occurs during the 2-week survey period. Refers to any payment to an employee for a specific purpose, such as travel or lodging, For example, if an employee is working 150 miles from home and the employer provides that employee with a daily allowance of $50 to cover food and lodging, any amount that is not actually expended on the food and lodging, as documented by itemized receipts retained by the employer, is a benefit to the employee. If no receipts are retained, the full amount given to the worker must be reported. So in our situation with our carpenter, they were given $120 for a per diem benefit, and they did not keep a receipt of what was actually spent on travel costs versus what was pocketed by the employee. This being the case, the full $120 must be reported on the survey. Again, here just as a reference, if receipts are retained, which is not the situation in our case here, but I just want to propose this as an example so it's clear. So if the employee spent $100 of the $120 on travel related to work, such as gas, food, etc., as supported by receipts, then only the remaining $20 would need to be reported on the survey. However, again, with our current worker, we must report the full $120 since there were no receipts retained, which is a benefit for that week. Since it is a weekly cost, we can use the formula again in the instruction sheet for this calculation, which is the weekly cost, $120, divided by the yearly hours. We'll use again here 2,000, and then multiply that by 52 weeks to get the $3.12 an hour as our per diem benefit to add to the survey. We can now add $3.12 for the per diem column, and they had no other benefits, so we can add $0.00 to the hourly other column. We see they were working in Somerset County, so we can add SOM for Somerset to the county column. And we see here that they were working on a building construction project, so we can add B2 as a construction type. We now have a complete fifth worker added to the survey. Now for our final example. Say we have 7 plumber helpers, all male, who worked in York County on a marine construction project for both the 2nd and 3rd weeks of July. They were all making the same $35.22 an hour for an hourly rate, $2.58 an hour as a health benefit, $2.02 an hour for pension, and 71 cents an hour for PTO, and they had no other benefits. First, we need to notice that they are plumber helpers and not plumbers. For this, we need to revisit the note here about apprentices and helpers boxed off in red. And again, it reads, apprentices and trainees are classified alongside the journeymen and masters of the trades for which they are being trained. Helpers and aides are classified as 47, 20, 61 construction laborer because they are not in a formal training for the occupation which they are assisting. This being the case, these plumber helpers would receive the same code as a construction laborer since they are not in a formal training program. We can then add plumber helper as the title and the laborer code of 472061 as the code. We know the workers are all male, so we can add that to the gender column. Next, we note that they were all making the same wage benefits and worked in the same county on the same project. With that information, we can combine all of them onto one line. So if we go back to our instructions page, we can see what allows us to do this. So here in the boxed off section, it reads you can use one line to report multiple employees who have the exact same information. If any of the information is different, that employee must be listed on a separate line. Since we know they all have the same information, we can add 7 to the number of employees to save us time from writing the same information down on 7 separate lines. They had $35.22 as an hourly wage, $2.58 as a health benefit, $2.02 for pension, 71 cents an hour for PTO, and they had no other benefits, so we can enter $0.00 for the per diem and other columns. For county, we see they were all working in York County, and for the construction type, they were involved in a marine construction project. So going back to our industry classification sheet, we can see that the marine construction projects fall here, which is classified as an HV or a heavy bridge project for marine construction. We can now add HV to the construction type, and we are all set with those 7 workers. Now that we've included all of our workers, we need to add up the total number of employees column on the back page of the survey, here boxed off in red. In this situation, we have 12 employees listed. Once you've added up the total number of employees on the back page of the survey, we need to check to make sure this number matches section B1 plus section B2 employment numbers that are found on the front page of the survey, that are also boxed off here in red. So these numbers must always match, and this is also one of our most frequent callbacks on the survey when these numbers don't match. So please take a moment to double check that these numbers are equal before sending in your survey. Now I just want to end this section by going over a few examples of workers we do not want included on the survey. So first, say we have a paver operator working in Knox County during the first week of June. So the first thing we need to notice here is the time that they worked. Here we see it was during the first week in June. So since the survey period only covers the 2nd and 3rd weeks of July, you would not include this worker on the survey. Also, this worker is not working as a special request occupation like the explosive and blasters in 2025, so they are not subject to the expanded time frame where those workers would be counted. Next, say we have a salaried carpenter working in Cumberland during the 2nd week of July. Here we notice that the worker is salaried and not hourly. So we do only include hourly paid construction workers on the survey. So if they are salaried, even if they're actively performing construction work during the survey period, you would not include them on the survey because they are salaried. Next, we have a non-working plumber supervisor that was supervising employees during the 3rd week of July. First, we see that they are a non-working plumber supervisor. So you would only include supervisors and foremen that are actively performing construction work during the survey period. If they are only supervising employees, you do not include them on the survey. And now we can round out our training by discussing the final section here, which is submitting the survey. And there are 3 ways you can use to submit your completed survey to us. So the first is through paper mail, so the completed survey can be mailed using the post office. You only need to include the survey form itself, which is the front and the back pages. You do not need to include the occupations list, the instructions, or the cover letter. And also, as I'd mentioned earlier in the training, a prepaid return envelope is included in the July mailing for you to mail us your completed survey. And again, please make sure that the contact information on the front page of the survey is filled out and legible, because we do need to know who to reach out to and how to reach out to them if we have questions on the data that we receive. Also, as a note, paper mail is definitely a fine option if you'd prefer to send it this way. We still do receive a lot of paper mail submissions. However, just note that this method does encompass all of the issues with postal mail, such as potential delays, lost mail, or damaged materials, etc. The completed survey can also be emailed to us at constructionwagesurvey@maine.gov. As with the other methods, you only need to include the survey form, which is both the front and the back pages. We will accept scans, pictures, and other electronic submissions as long as the information is legible. And if you do decide to send us an email, you will receive an email response from us that your survey is complete. And remember, electronic versions of all of the survey materials are available at the link below. Finally, fax. The completed survey can be faxed to us at 207-623-7937, and you again only need to include the survey form. You don't need to include the occupations, instructions, or the cover letter. And again, please make sure that contact information is filled out. Finally, thank you for taking the training on the construction wage survey. If you have any questions, contact information there is provided, and I'll be happy to help you out.